right, God Johnny is here. Today, we're talking about a very important subject. This subject is about royalty. And this is royalty. Right now as we speak. Because as I address you, I am speaking to a particular vibration within a select group of people. Okay? The tastemakers, the elites, the beautiful, the wise, the intelligent, the movers, the shakers, right? These are a lot of the time associated with royalty or associated with the more royal way of life. We have the stars, we have the elites, the successful. They have a different way of going about life than many people who live an everyday life, right? Your blue collars, your white, whatever. But what I'm here to do is communicate to the people who are next in line, because this next level of royal energy is something that is not third dimensionally based anymore. It never really was, but the idea of royalty has always been outside of us. Let's first even begin with color or creed. There were points in history where if you were of a certain color, you were completely removed from royalty. If you were black in the 1700s, people were stripping you of this from the day you were born. There's been caste systems in other cultures. We have systems of religion where you give up the idea of royalty or worship, or it's always going up to something else aside from you. The idea is for you to be separated from royalty and for it to be something outside of you, something you have to work to gain. Something you have to, well, if you work hard for 20 years, you might just be able to do X, Y, Z. You might be able to live this kind of way. You might be able to, if you work hard, you just may be able to get that what you wish for. So let's speak on royalty, because there is a new frequency that is rising amongst many of the younger people, the people who are of all ages essentially willing to claim it. But you're going to see royalty begin to take a jump step. And it begins with this core understanding for the younger people, the people who are rising, the people looking around at the world and saying, hold on, I'm better than this. The people saying, I don't need to do X, Y, Z to earn royalty or to sit at the throne or to sit at somebody's feet that's royal. We're over that. We're over that. Because the big key is this, it's outside. Now, if we really look at what royalty is about, it's about, I was talking about it with someone yesterday. We were talking about royalty and some of the things that represent royalty. And she said elegance, power, control, symbols such as a crown, colors like purple. Let's talk about that, power. Is power from within, or is it something you have to fight to get? That's people say you got to fight to get power. But if you understand as within, so without, power begins from within first, right? Then you have control. Can you control yourself? Everybody's so worried about controlling the outer world. I don't control what's going on out here. Nobody's really controlling what's going on out here when you look at the grand scheme. There's people who control structures, but there's still people who don't live in the states. There's still people who don't live under this jurisdiction. It just seems like it. That's the illusion they want to put out. So control is something that begins with within. You see what I'm saying? A crown. Are you going to buy a crown? If somebody gives you power, if they give you prestige, and if they give you a crown, does that make you a king? Or does that make you a figurehead? Because you can be a king, people can look at you as a joke if you put a crown on. You don't become a king because you put a crown on. What about your crown chakra? What about the crown within that allows you to connect up? You see? That allows you to get high-level signals from the cosmos. You see? So I bring all these things up because there's a fundamental flaw in the idea of royalty. Okay, now there is a physical idea of royalty where your bloodline links back. Now that's something different because what I'm speaking on is shifting away from that. Because that's the same thing that's been propagating society as it is now. Bloodlines, people having power and control because of who they belong to. What's coming of age now is something much more spiritual. Something that doesn't involve a bloodline. That doesn't involve physical blood. What this involves is a mentality. Essentially, there is a throne that exists within you. That until you sit on the throne of self and become the king of self or queen of self, the king, God, goddess, you see, queen, whatever you want to call it, master, owner, controller, until you find and begin to utilize the power in yourself, until you begin to control yourself, until you begin to emanate your purple frequency, right? Then you will be disconnected from royalty. And I'm telling you right now, this is the age where if you stand on your throne, if you operate from royalty from within, the power you'll have access to will surpass that of anything handed down in the physical material realm right now. Okay? There's people always chasing success, chasing status symbols. There's people always want to be in the hot spots. All that is cool, but if you look at many of their internal worlds, it's not strong. It's built on someone else's platform. Royalty is about creating your kingdom. If I tell you who's going to go to bat for you, what's your army? What's your military that you're controlling? Some of you are like, I'm not controlling no military. That's the problem. You don't know your origin. You don't know what you're linked to. You haven't created a connection with the cosmic force that fights on your behalf every day, that can destroy anything in this outer world. See, these are foreign concepts to some, but this is what you have to connect to. You see, your army no longer is your 5 friends with guns, because guess what? They might come to your aid and shoot somebody on your behalf, and they're going to get locked up, right? Because they're under someone else's jurisdiction. That's why it is more important now than ever that we connect to the royalty within ourselves and begin to connect with forces that serve us outside of anything physical, because this is what we need to tap into. It's time for you to tap into your spiritual origins, your spiritual frequencies that you might not be able to see. It's time, because we're in a time now where the royal are going to connect up, and as long as we see royalty outside of ourselves, we will fall with the royals of this plane. You will always be under their jurisdiction. You will always be essentially under someone's control or whatever, working for somebody, because you're not tapped into royalty. And I'm going to tell you why you're not tapped into royalty. It's because when I look outside, there's nothing royal in your outside world. If you're growing up in the inner city, if you're growing up in environments and conditions of a regular kid, teen, you're not connected to royalty. When you say, you can say, I'm royal, I'm worth this and that, and then you step outside and your teacher says, Johnny, sit down. You're like, hold on. Is that how you talk to a king? Is that how you talk to a queen? No. But they're talking to you like that. And the minute you accept that communication, you have made an agreement that this is how you get communicated to, which means you're also making a cut off. You're making an agreement to be separated from royalty. Because who's telling the king, go sit down, king? Who's telling the president, who goes sit down, president? No. But then I got to ask you, why do you accept that communication? A lot of you are in relationships, right? And your mate talks to their manager at their job with 10 times more respect than they talk to you. And a manager isn't even royal. A manager is up under a corporation. He manages the affairs of the corporation, which isn't even royal. It's just a system. And you treat a person within someone else's system better than you treat your own king or queen, quote unquote. You don't treat them like kings and queens. You treat them like boys, you treat them like girls, right? Half of it's because they don't see themselves as a king or queen. They don't see themselves as royalty. And you don't see them as royalty, and you don't see yourself as royalty, because if a queen gets with a king, and if a queen gets with the, if a king gets with the queen, and a queen gets with the king, and you're sitting here telling you, get out the bed, you get on my nerves, then you don't have a king. You don't have a queen. You're dealing with a boy. You're dealing with a girl. Or a man, if you're lucky. Or a woman, if you're lucky. That's how bad it's gotten. So it begins with understanding that if you are of royalty in this world, then you are a royal being in a unroyal world, which creates cognitive dissonance, we could say, or we could just cause it a confusion, because a con just got in the mix, you see, which is this. So I'm telling you, first and foremost, like I said in some other videos, the idea of not ignoring, but of understanding that the frequency of this earth, they're not going to give me what I deserve in my mind, what I want, what I desire. So you know what? I'm not expecting them to give it to me. I'm taking it. And it begins with every communication. You know, how do people communicate with you? How did your cousin communicate with you? How did your sister communicate with you? How did your friend? You're like, well, they're not going to care. Well, that's a problem, okay? If you don't communicate to me with respect and royalty, I communicate with people with respect because I want to be treated with respect, because that's how royals go about things, right? Okay, so then how are people communicating with you? It's time for you to make sure that this outer world, as within, so without, it's time for this inner world to match the outer world, okay? And it begins with royalty. Because as soon as you can see the royalty in yourself, that means you can see it in me. If I can see it in me, then that means I can see the royalty in you. If I want to operate in a world where I'm being respected, I want to respect others in a certain way. That's why I'm telling you all this information. Because I'm tired of communicating with people as baboons. I'm tired of communicating with people acting weak. I'm tired of us all acting like we don't know what's going on. And we're all just going, oh yeah, I got to go to work. Oh, my boss. My boss. You're a boss? You're saying you're a boss. You better understand the words that you're saying. It begins with the communication. Watch Game of Thrones and look at how they speak to the queen. Yes, madam. Yes, madam. Whatever. Yes. It's with respect. A lot of you growing up in the hood, in these inner cities, y'all talk to each other like y'all are anything. What's up, fool? Don't get me wrong. I don't mind. You know, that's what black people do. It's alchemy. They can flip words like nigga and make it good. That's beautiful. But we got to know the words we're using. You know what I mean? The word fool. If you're calling your friend fool, yeah, man, you know, this joint job done, you know, I ain't about shit. What? This is how a lot of slang people out here talk. You know, don't get me wrong. I've spoken this slang as well, but we have to understand what we're saying. So I'm saying this right now is that as for the few people to understand this frequency, it's time that we reclaim our throne, beginning here. And it's time that you make what's within override what's out here. And it begins with you first correcting what's out here. Make sure the frequency, the communication you're getting, the way people respond to you, it's time to let them know, look, man, that's not what's going on right now. Because if I allow you to speak to me like this, if I allow people to treat me like this, right? If I allow myself to be, my boss said I got to come in too, so I have to go. Hold on. You know, I'm all about duties, but what are you? Okay, if you're like the rest or whatever, let them do that. There's always gonna be somebody to come into work. What are you? If you're watching this video, you're watching it for a reason. So, I can go on forever with this subject, but I'm gonna tell you the key right here is this. Tap into the royalty within yourself. And this begins with you beginning to communicate with your higher self. When you look and you imagine yourself outside of these rules, the beauty of you, your most beautiful self, your great self, the powerful you. Who is that being? And it's time for you to communicate with it. And you cannot communicate with your higher self until you begin to communicate with it with royalty. So find that within yourself and understand the areas in your life right now that aren't lining up in the outer world as royal. And it's time for you to change these things. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but it's your choice. You can keep living your life or you can rise. You can take your seat on the throne. It's time for you to create, because that's what royals do. They create, they decide what's going to happen in the world. Are you deciding what's going to happen in your world, or are you doing what everyone told you to do? So, for all the royals out there, my kings, my queens, my gods, my goddesses, my masters, okay? My cosmic, powerful, light, people, beings, entities, all of you who are here to rise. It's time for us to see the royalty in ourselves. It's time for you to see the royalty in me. It's time for me to see the royalty in you. It's time for us to speak with one another on a frequency up here. And everything that doesn't match that in this outer world, which is going to be most of it. Most of this earthly world is, when I drive through around, I'm like, this is a joke. This is not my home. I'm sorry. This is not my thing. I came here to play around, you know what I'm saying? This is not my thing, though. I didn't make this community. A lot of people claiming hoods that they don't even have jurisdiction in. They can get kicked out of their hood tomorrow, but they're saying, yeah, I'm from this joint. And it's a white dude, and no disrespect to white people, I'm saying, it's some white dude with a completely different reality from the people living in these areas, or it could be anybody that's owning that block and getting paid for it. So we got to know what's really good. It's time to let go of this earthly BS and begin to claim your seat on the throne. And when you reflect that to the outer world, you now bring royalty into this dimension. So it's our job to bring royalty into this dimension. And as we do that, I promise you, the royalty will begin to expand. But it begins here, as within, so without. So my exercise for you today, I want you to write down 10 things about you that are royal in your mind, or that represent royalty. Another one that the lady said was elegance. Okay, that's a royal quality. Are you elegant? It's time for you to identify what represents royalty and see what it is about yourself that matches that. Because that's going to begin to bring you and align you with your natural way. Okay? Everything else is down here. Okay? And we don't see that because we're on the throne. So with that being said, thank you for listening. And we have wonderful content coming to you moving forward. Aside from that, be blessed, be royal. Let the God within you shine like never before. The royals are here. Bless up.